For the first time since 2017, Qatar's ruler is attending the Gulf Cooperation Council. This comes after Saudi Arabia announced the kingdom is ending its embargo of the Arab state. The 41st summit of Gulf Arab leaders is taking place in the ancient Saudi Arabian city of Ula, about 3 hours north of Medina. Qatar's emir arrived in Saudi Arabia today. He was greeted with a hug from the crown prince. The encounter was broadcast live on state television. Joining us now to talk more about this is Ambassador James Smith. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Ambassador Smith, welcome. It's great to have you with us. So why is the move to reopen the Saudi Arabian-Qatar border so important, and what does this mean for the region?
Well, it's good to be with you this afternoon. First of all, it's very important to the United States because we have very important relationships with each of the countries in the GCC. Saudi Arabia, long-standing relationship. The Army forces of the United States, Central Command, are in Kuwait, the naval forces in Bahrain, and a large air base in Doha, Qatar. So we have important bilateral relationships with each of the countries in the region. So stability within the GCC is very important to us. For the region, it's also important because the region faces a lot of challenges, not the least of which is Iran. And if the GCC is fractured, their ability to be a counterweight to Iran is going to be problematic.
So while Saudi Arabia is reopening its borders to Qatar, and of course that's a first step in the right direction, we're learning that Gulf Arab leaders signed a declaration Tuesday to ease the rift with Qatar. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a very important effort. And you've got to give a lot of credit to the late Emir Sabah of Kuwait, who worked for several years trying to bring this together. The challenge, of course, is that while Saudi Arabia sees itself as the senior among the six equals of the GCC, the other six countries want to have their own foreign policy. And sometimes this family feud breaks out in the open when Qatar has relationships that stress the Saudis. I think most of these things can be resolved by dialogue internally. So that's why I'm hoping for a healthy GCC conversation on the way ahead. Saudi Arabia has a unique problem right now. And even though they're modernizing their country, they've established as a standard no dissent whatsoever. We still have women that are in prison for blogging to allow women drivers. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And the presence of Al Jazeera in Qatar creates a real problem for the Saudis because they do not want any dissenting argument against their policies. These things are going to have to be resolved internally.
And could pose a challenge for sure. So, Ambassador, as you mentioned earlier, we saw the U.S. play a major role in the Middle East in the past year. We know President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, played a role in negotiating this deal. And in fact, he's attending the GCC summit. Give us a little more insight into the U.S. role in brokering these relationships in the region, especially in light of what you said earlier in terms of what is in it for our country long term.
Well, certainly the administration played a role because personal relationships are very important in that culture. Having said that, a disproportionate share of the credit goes to Sheikh Sabah, who laid the groundwork. And then as the move was toward reconciliation, that personal relationship, I think, it had a huge impact. At the same time, the Saudis are never one to be pushed into doing something. And when you look at the region right now, they have a lot of real challenges to deal with. It starts with Iran. What are they going to do with Israel? How are they going to develop the private sector economy called for in the Saudi Vision 2030? And it's hard to deal with those things if you have this family feud going on with your neighbor. So I think the Saudis realized as well that it was time to do something. So I give the administration credit for stepping in when the time was right, but the agreement does not resolve the underlying issues. So there's much more diplomatic work to be done.
In light of all of that, then, what can we expect out of this year's GCC?
It's going to be an entertaining summit. There's a lot to talk about. It starts with Iran. Everything starts with Iran. The movement of missiles into Iraq. They're ramping up their nuclear program, and then the destabilization efforts all around Saudi Arabia, to the north, Iraq and Syria, and to the south in Yemen. That's the beginning. There will be much discussion on the relationship with President Biden and what his administration holds. They expect economic discussions because with the pandemic, the economic development slowed as it has in other countries. So how do you kickstart the economic development in the region, even though Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are doing very, very well with the pandemic? So there's a whole range of issues, and again, the one that is most recent is, what is Saudi Arabia's relationship going to be with Israel? And are all the GCC countries going to come on board for Israel or for Saudi Arabia? They want a solution to the Palestinian question. So there's much to talk about.
A lot indeed. All right. Well, Ambassador James Smith, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.